I'm just going to give you a tour of the mastering chain I use and talk a little bit about how you should not be sending off your tracks to get mastered. You should just do it yourself because it's not that hard. And I'm gonna tell you all about why. So let's get started. I wanted to show you the mastering chain I use. That's a new one. I usually use something very simple. I am of the mentality that most of your stuff should be ready to go and sounding great before you even get to mastering. I work with L1 or some sort of limiter. It doesn't have to be L1. I usually use L1, but I'll use occasionally a fab filter limiter too. There's advantages to using different ones. I use that to get a better sense of what the master is going to sound like, so I compress it. I reduce the threshold -6 decibel. So, and then when I'm ready to master, I actually manually reduce the volume of the master with this tool. I'm assuming you can see it. Yeah. Right here. And I go down -6 dB. Right. And that gives me headroom to work with and build the signal back up using mastering tools. Not necessarily specifically for mastering, but these are all things that would go good in a mastering chain. I actually read an article or something with deadmau5 a while ago. And apparently he's still using it today because I just saw his master class. I figured I might as well brush up on some shit. So I watched the little segment of him, the master class portion where he's actually mastering the track. And nothing's changed much. And actually, hearing that interview with him long ago gave me the confidence to do my own mastering. And the reason why is because nobody knows your music as well as you do. And I can't count how many. I mean, I could count how many times, maybe 4 or 5. 5 times where I've had releases on Beatport and they've completely fucked the mastering. I mean, badly, like ruined the track. And there's nothing I could do. Because they claimed it's part of the mastering process. I'm like, no, making a song sound like utter shit is not part of the mastering process. If you heard the difference between my first mixdown, albeit it was shitty mixdown, but it had a lot of punch and dynamics. You hear the difference between that and like what happened to the master after I gave it to the label. Ugh, it was lifeless, absolutely lifeless. It was pathetic. Like, how could somebody actually finish a master like that? And of course, it was my fault. I gave it to him in that way. I gave him the mix down without anything on the master, and I probably didn't get enough headroom. And even if I did, the dynamics weren't there, and a lot of stuff. But when I had it in my project and I was using Ozone, everything sounded great because I had kind of configured everything so Ozone would be doing a lot of the work. Anyways, so the idea with mastering is that you want to have everything in place and before the master track starts doing its magic. So that means get EQ. Don't rely on the EQ in the master to get shimmering highs in your hi-hats or in your snare or in your cymbals or punchy present bass. The mastering is sort of like just making sure it sounds great on every speaker. It's not about nothing you do in mastering is going to make your track sound that much better. There's a lot of stuff that makes it sound great, but it's not going to be a massive improvement. If your track doesn't sound good before it was mastered, it's not going to sound very good mastered. So here's the mastering chain. I reduce it 6 decibels. First thing I go into is a linear phase EQ, low band, because all I'm doing is cutting out 30 hertz and below. And that's that. I don't touch it. Next, I have a stereo processor. This is something I've been using more, but I didn't start using it until like last year. And I think the first track I used it on was the Agenda, and that was like retro wave. It wasn't even quite synth wave. It was like throwback, and it had a lot of shimmering highs and maybe even too much. But that's kind of how you do it. Sometimes you have to go overboard and master stuff over the top, and then realize there's a middle ground. I would actually encourage experimenting and really pushing stuff to the limit, because once you know your limits, then working within them, you'll sound so much better. So the last master I put out, or kind of the rough master with this, had way too much low end, and it was saturated. It wasn't distorted, but it was heavily saturated, and almost and the lows became unrecognizable. They were pronounced, but they were very slow and kind of I don't know, it just felt laggy almost. So I went back and did a complete redo, and I have a long session. I'll probably post that up, but I don't want to subject you guys to 2.5 hours of me just diddling. So I'm going to have to edit that down. I'll probably post this one first, since this is the more interesting one. So yeah, basic stuff that I do, I just increase the widening a little bit. Occasionally I'll use this exciter, but chances are there are individual tracks that I put this on as well, such as the groups for drums. I'll use that for the individual sections. And then on the master, I'll typically use this kind of stuff. The reason why is once I have this set and I'm liking it, right? And I'm thinking, oh man, now it just needs that little extra. It needs just something else to kind of really bring it out. That's where the passive EQ, the Manly Massive passive clone. Passive EQ is made by Native Instruments. It's one of the few plugins that I actually think they did a fantastic job on. And technically, I think it's by Softtube. And Native Instruments probably just publishes it. I think that's what it was. Cool thing about this is mid and side, right? Now, default, that switch will be off to the left, and it'll be left and right. That might be okay for some applications, but not mine. Not what we're doing. So you split it to mid and side. You can make very, very small adjustments to whether you want more of that stereo field that you just enhanced in the previous step. And by the way, this is left over from prior instances, and I kind of use it once in a while to check what it would be like if I was using Pro L. So I'm just going to get rid of that for now so it doesn't distract us. But yeah, passive EQ is meant to bring out and complement the best of this without overdoing it. And so on certain things, I mean, I did really minimal amounts of stuff here. This is to get a little bit more pronounced lows. So that's like, you know, super lows would be like 150 and below, and then, or, you know, that's punch area. And then anything above that, it's starting to get more into the bass line, and that's what I wanted. I wanted the bass line to be very audible, but not overpowering in the low end. So yeah, I cut the low end off at 22. Obviously, it's still cut off again at earlier on in the chain with the linear phase EQ, but I just did that anyways in case. I'm sorry, that is high pass. Right, okay, never mind. Yeah, that's cutting the lows, and this is low pass. Yeah, I added a little bit of I cut off the highs, the 18 and above on this part, because hi-hats and shimmer tend to go well in stereo and tend to interfere with the mix a little bit less. So I got my cymbals way wide in this one, and that's what this is up here. This is the shimmer machine, I would call it. It takes some tinkering, and you got to exaggerate the bell curves and just fuck around until something starts sounding good. Just make sure the headphones you're wearing that you trust. So, and I would recommend, if you haven't done this sort of thing before, listen to the track that's most similar to the one that you've made. You might actually have to go search for one, or tell a friend, hey, does my latest track sound like anything familiar? Or do you have anything in the key of 5A and C minor? You ask a DJ, hey, what would you play alongside this? What's got something similar? They might pull a track, and then you can use that as reference for something to compare it to, something relative. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to use the EQ curve or do anything like that crap. You just need some assistance. You need something to A and B. But don't rely on that either. You just need that as an extra step in the process. So yeah, now that I have this figured out, I went on and I did this. Now this is this is using the rest of the headroom essentially, and it's adding an effect that I have sworn by for better half of 5 or 6 years now. I think I've been using it longer than that, since the Navy. So that would be 2010 I started using Inflator, and I'm just like, and I was sold on it by an advertisement for the Inflator, and it was the producer of Seal, who said he uses it as the last thing, or one of the last steps on every master he's ever done. I just thought that was funny, and I was like, wow, well, the guy that produced Seal is real talented, so I'll bet there's something to this. And sure enough, there was. I like it a lot. It adds, I don't know what the hell it's doing. It's a limiter. Warm it up. fatten it up. I'll give you an A and B here just to give you an example. Let's start with it off. And now I'm going to turn it on right now. Probably a better thing to do would just show the effect. So I'll turn this down and then back up. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, it's a great tool. I love using it. The one thing is you just got to be careful how much effect you put on because it can muddy shit up a little bit. So I usually start with that at 0, crank it way up, and then try to find something in the middle. And that 33 was around where I liked it. Also, curve can mess with it a little bit. And then the final step, L1 Ultra Maximizer. You don't have to use L1. I use L1. Usually it's anywhere between -5 and -7, like I had mentioned in that previous video. And that's it, really. I've had tracks with just L1 where I did a ton of EQ on the groups and then said, fuck it, I'm going to mini master on the groups here and then get them just right and then throw on an L1, and that was during the days where I wasn't really comprehending the fact that you can kind of start down low and then work your way back up in a mastering chain. Like, I never really knew what that was about. I've heard about giving yourself headroom a while back, and I thought that just meant like make your kick really loud and make everything not as loud, so there's a lot of dynamic range. That way when you compress it, when you add the limiter, then it sounds normal, right? And then you get just that fat hit. Because most of the time, it is what you're limiting. You're limiting the kick. Well, I didn't realize that you literally need 6 decibels of headroom from the top of the kick, from the highest peaks in your track. So, yeah, once I started doing that more often, I felt more and more comfortable adding more and more to the mastering chain. Some guys' mastering chain is ridiculous. It's like 7 or 8 plugins long. It just gets a little bit overboard, I think. But if you know how to use them and you're noticing a difference, there's nothing wrong with doing that. So if you like using Ozone's little mini modules and then you got a couple of favorite Waves plugins and this and that, and then you say, oh, this EQ adds some great mids, and my track always needs some more crispy mids. Just whatever you like doing, put it in there. Fuck it, right? Who cares? If you think it sounds good, chances are it sounds good, and you're your own worst critic too. Or you are your own worst critic. Is that the phrase? I can't remember. Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm going to stick with this master chain. I might find out that it's really not doing the trick. I just got home from dropping my kids off at daycare, and I heard this in my car. That's another thing. Check your mix in your car. I wasn't sure what to think. The kick was too loud, and low ends were too loud. And I think that was mostly due to the fact that I was using too much of this effect, and I had this turned up too high. I was really driving L1 into territory that sounded like shit. That, and I didn't have this turned on, so bass was just getting lost. It still might sound lost. I haven't really fully done a check. I haven't done a full playthrough. But yeah, you just go back and you make little adjustments as needed, and then you go export it and you go listen again somewhere else. Send it off to friends to have them check it out, and then listen to A and B stuff. Also remember, just because a track has different dynamics or sounds different doesn't mean you're not doing something right. Perfect example. Let's see. If you just you got to be careful which track you A and B with, because there's plenty of poorly mastered tracks out there. Yeah. So when you go off and compare your track to something else, just make sure make sure you have a general sense of, is this a well mastered track? Is this going to be something worth comparing it to? And if it's not, just go off and listen to some Pete Tong essential mixes, or go browse Beatport and download a couple of new tracks that sound kind of cool and sound like something that you would play or something that you would want to sound like, and then use that. And that's basically how I learned how to become comfortable with mastering. I've always been comfortable doing a mix down. After being out to sea twice in the Navy for 2 different things for 6 months each, I had enough trial and error under my belt to really know what not to do, and I had a general sense of what to do. And because I had like a year or two's worth of Sound on Sound and Computer Music and Future Music magazines. And then on top of that, somebody gave me a present when I was out to sea. It was like a bunch of digital downloads or digital versions of magazines and articles and stuff. So all the information I had retained on all those hours at sea, I got to try every night. I mean, I stayed up till like 2 a.m. on average each day. I was getting probably 4 or 5 hours of sleep tops. But yeah, that's where I soaked it all up. And the more time you put in doing shit and making mistakes, the better your shit starts to sound over time. It really does. Like, you can just totally fuck a track over, and make sure you hit save as if you're going to go off and experiment. Hit save as, then do the experiment. That way you can go back to the safe track where you hadn't quite screwed everything up. So that's the last piece of advice. Post up with any comments, and look for another video, and maybe later today or tomorrow. Take care, guys.